Hello and welcome. So in this video we are going to be looking at the story of Scratching Fanny of Cock Lane. In 1762, word spread of a haunting at a house in Cock Lane, Smithfield, London. The ghost communicated through Elizabeth Parsons, the daughter of Richard Parsons, a parish clerk, and claimed that she had been murdered by William Kent, a usurer from Norfolk. This haunting attracted great public attention, but was it really all that it seemed? William Kent had married Elizabeth Lines in around 1756-57. They lived in Stoke Ferry, Norfolk, where William kept an inn and later a post office. William and Elizabeth's marriage was a loving, happy one, but it did not last long as Elizabeth sadly died during childbirth. Elizabeth's sister Fanny had moved in to help Elizabeth with the birth, and after Elizabeth's death stayed on to help care for the child. But sadly the baby died too. Fanny stayed with William to help take care of him and the house, and soon they started a relationship. But due to canon law they were unable to marry. They had asked whether they would have been able to marry, but were told that because Elizabeth had given William a child, this meant that he was unable to marry her sister. So in 1759, William left Fanny and moved to London in the hopes of purchasing a place in some public office. Fanny went to stay with one of her brothers. Fanny's family was not too pleased about her relationship with William and wanted them to stay apart, but Fanny kept on writing William letters, and eventually he invited her to join him in his lodgings in East Greenwich. They decided to live together as man and wife, even writing their wills to favour each other. But people soon found out that they were not married. Their landlord was not too happy about the situation and refused to repay William some money that he had loaned him. William had his landlord arrested. While attending church one day, William and Fanny met Richard Parsons, who worked at the church. Richard was considered respectable, though he was a drunk and struggled to provide for his family. After hearing about the couple's struggles, he invited William and Fanny to lodge in a room in his home in Cock Lane, which Richard lived in with his wife and 2 daughters. They accepted and moved into their new dwellings, William loaning Richard 12 guineas, which was agreed to be paid back at 1 guinea per month. One day William had to leave to go to a wedding in the country. Fanny wasn't able to go with him as she was heavily pregnant, so he asked the parson's eldest daughter Elizabeth, who was about 11 years old, to stay with Fanny and share her bed with her. While the two were sharing the bed, they both heard scratching and rapping noises. At first the noises were put down to the noises made by a neighbouring cobbler. But when the noises were heard on a Sunday when the cobbler was not working, it was wondered whether there was something more supernatural going on. The supernatural theory was pushed further when James Frazen, the landlord of the Wheatsheaf pub, visited the parson's house and witnessed a ghostly white figure on the stairs. When it was almost time for Fanny to give birth, William made arrangements for them to move to their own place, but by January 1760 the place was not ready, so they had to move into a flat that was not that great until their home was ready. But on the 25th of January, Fanny fell ill. Doctor diagnosed smallpox, so Fanny sent for her attorney to ensure that everything was in order and that William would inherit her estate, the bulk of which was a £150 share of her dead brother Thomas's estate. A priest assured Fanny that all her sins would be forgiven, and she died on the 2nd of February. As the executor of Fanny's will, William organised her funeral. Her family was told of her death, and Fanny's sister Anne attended her funeral. When Anne learned that she and Fanny's other siblings would only receive half a crown each according to her will, she tried to block the will but failed to do so. There were also other issues with Thomas's estate. Part of Thomas's estate was some land. The executor of his will, his brother John, had sold this land, and each sibling had received a share of the sale. Fanny was meant to receive £95, but because of her death this money went straight to William. But there had been legal problems with the sale, and each of the beneficiaries had to pay £45 in compensation. William refused to pay the money, saying that he had already spent it on Fanny's debts. John was not happy about this, so started legal proceedings against William. After Fanny's death, William became a stockbroker and remarried in 1761. Richard Parsons had not completely repaid William's loan to him, so William sued Richard and managed to recover his money by January 1762. It was around this time that the mysterious noises that Fanny and Elizabeth had heard before started again. The noises appeared to be emanating from Elizabeth, who had also started to experience fitting. Determined to find out where the noises were coming from, Richard Parsons asked a carpenter to remove the wainscoting around Elizabeth's bed, but the noises continue, often being likened to a cat scratching a chair. He also called in the help of John Moore, rector of St Bartholomew the Great in West Smithfield. It had been suggested that the first strange noises had been made by the spirit of William Kent's first wife Elizabeth, but now it was thought that it was the spirit of Fanny trying to communicate. A method of communication was devised where Fanny's spirit would give 1 knock for yes and 2 knocks for no. When questioning Fanny's spirit, they discovered that Fanny had been murdered. She had not died of smallpox as thought, but had instead died of arsenic poisoning, and that shockingly the poison had been given to her by William Kent 2 hours before she had died. Richard Parsons told John Moore that Fanny's sister Anne had told him that the lid on Fanny's coffin had been screwed down and that she had been unable to see her sister's body. John Moore thought that this was because William wanted to keep it hidden that Fanny had no smallpox scarring on her. John Moore was leaning towards the Methodist faith, so he trusted that the ghost was telling the truth, but he enlisted the aid of a Methodist called Thomas Broughton. Thomas Broughton visited the Parsons' home on Cock Lane and was convinced that the ghost was real. The story of Scratching Fanny of Cock Lane spread around London and was picked up by the media, mainly the Public Ledger magazine. The public came to think that William Kent was a murderer. After finding out what was being written about him in the Public Ledger, William Kent was determined that he was going to clear his name. With a witness, he went to see John Moore, who showed him the list of questions that he and Richard Parsons had drew up to ask Fanny's ghost. One of the questions was whether Fanny was the wife of William Kent, which William had to admit that they were not actually married. John Moore told William that he did not think that he was a murderer, but that he believed something dark was going on, and he thought that William should go to the Parsons' house to see for himself. William contacted the doctors who had helped with Fanny's illness, and on the 12th of January they all went to the Parsons' home. At the Parsons' home, Elizabeth was publicly undressed, and she and her younger sister got into their bed. Everyone else gathered around the bed to start a séance. When the séance started, Mary Fraser, a relative of the Parsons, ran around the bedroom shouting for Fanny to come out, but she didn't. John Moore said that the spirit would not come out where they were making too much noise. He suggested that everyone should leave the room and that he would try to summon Fanny. 10 minutes later, John Moore called everyone back into Elizabeth's bedroom, saying that he had managed to summon her. Everyone gathered around the girl's bed again, and John Moore began to ask questions that he and Richard Parsons had come up with. Are you the wife of Mr. Kent? 2 knocks. Did you die naturally? 2 knocks. By poison? 1 knock. Did any person other than Mr. Kent administer it? 2 knocks. Someone in the séance audience said to William Kent that he should ask the ghost if he shall be hanged. William did, and the ghost answered with 1 knock, to which William said that the ghost was lying and was not the ghost of Fanny. The ghost seemed to be attached to William Parsons and moved around with her. On the 14th of January, she was moved to the house of Mr. Bray, where the knocking sounds were heard. On the 18th of January, Elizabeth returned to Cock Lane and another séance was held. During this séance, a clergyman used a candle to look under Elizabeth's bed. When he did this, the ghost refused to continue answering the questions, with Mary Fraser claiming that the ghost did not like the light. John Moore asked if the ghost would appear in court against William Kent, but it did not answer. When Fanny was alive, she and William had employed a maid called Esther Carlyle. John Moore wanted to question her, hoping to find evidence of Fanny's poisoning. He invited Esther to a séance that was being held on the 19th of January. At the séance, Esther was asked to confirm that Fanny had been poisoned, but Esther could not say no such thing, only that William and Fanny had been a very loving couple and had lived very happily together. At the séance, Esther asked the questions. She asked the ghost if she was Esther's mistress, to which there was one knock. She then asked if the ghost was angry with her, to which the ghost also gave one knock. To this Esther said, "Then I am sure, madam, you may be ashamed of yourself, for I never hurt you in my life." Another séance was held on the 20th of January, this time at the hold of a Mr. Bruin. At this séance was a man who suspected that the whole thing was made up and wanted to discover the truth. This man attended the séance with a group of people, and one of the members of the group positioned himself against the bed. He was asked to move but refused to do so, and after an argument the person who had asked him to move left. The suspicious gentleman asked Richard Parsons if Elizabeth could be moved to his house, but Richard refused. After this the ghost made no sound. After speaking to friends, Richard Parsons became worried that William Kent was conducting his own investigation into the incident. That night he had Elizabeth moved to St. Bartholomew's Hospital. There another séance was held, but the ghost did not make an appearance, and the audience of the séance complained that the whole thing was a deception. The Lord Mayor of London, Samuel Floodier, was approached and asked to investigate. He ordered for Elizabeth to be moved to another house. Richard Parsons agreed to do this, but asked if someone Elizabeth knew could go with her. This was refused. On the 26th of January, Elizabeth was taken to the house of Jane Armstrong, where she slept in a hammock. The noises continued. Elizabeth returned to Cock Lane, where she had some noble visitors. Horace Walpole, the 4th Earl of Orford, the Duke of York, Lady Northumberland, Lady Mary Coke, and Lord Hertford all visited her, with Walpole being very disappointed by the whole thing. A committee was put together to carry out an investigation. One of the members was writer Samuel Johnson, who documented a séance that he attended on the 1st of February. On the night of the 1st of February, many gentlemen, eminent of their rank and character, were, by the invitation of the Reverend Mr. Aldrich of Clerkenwell, assembled at his house for the examination of the noises supposed to be made by a departed spirit, for the detection of some enormous crime. About 10 at night the gentlemen met in the chamber in which the girl, supposed to be disturbed by the spirit, had, with proper caution, been put to bed by several ladies. They sat rather more than an hour, and hearing nothing, went downstairs, where they interrogated the father of the girl, who denied in the strongest terms any knowledge or belief of fraud. The supposed spirit had before publicly promised by an affirmative knock that it would attend one of the gentlemen to the vault under the church of St. John, Clerkenwell, where the body was deposited, and give a token of her presence there by knocking upon her coffin. It was therefore determined to make this trial of the existence or veracity of the supposed spirit. While they were inquiring and deliberating, they were summoned to the girl's chamber by some ladies who were near her bed, and who had heard knocks and scratches. When the gentleman entered, the girl declared that she felt the spirit like a mouse upon her back, and was required to hold her hands out of bed. From that time, though, the spirit was very solemnly required to manifest its existence by appearance, by impression on the hand or body of any present, by scratches, knocks, or any other agency. No evidence of any preternatural power was exhibited. The spirit was then very seriously advertised that the person to whom the promise was made of striking the coffin was then about to visit the vault, and that the performance of the promise was then claimed. The company at 1 o'clock went to the church, and the gentleman to whom the promise was made went with another into the vault. The spirit was solemnly required to perform its promise, but nothing more than silence ensured. The person supposed to be accused by the spirit then went down with several others, but no effect was perceived. Upon their return they examined the girl, but could not draw no confession from her. Between 2 and 3 she desired and was permitted to go home with her father. It is therefore the opinion of the whole assembly that the child has some art of making or counterfeiting a particular noise, and that there is no agency of any higher cause. John Moore began to believe that the ghost was an impostor, and told William Kent this. William asked John Moore to write all this down so that William could clear his name, but John Moore refused to do so. Richard Parsons allowed for Elizabeth to be moved to a house on the Strand from the 7th to the 10th of February and to a house in Covent Garden from the 14th of February. There she was put in a hammock, and the noises commenced, but they stopped when Elizabeth was asked to place her hands outside the bed. Later, her maids saw her conceal a piece of wood about 6 by 4 inches and reported this to the investigators. It was concluded that Elizabeth was making the noises and that her father had forced her to do so. William Kent was still trying to clear his name. A recent newspaper report had come out saying that the reason the ghost was no longer knocking was because Fanny's body had been removed from her coffin. William went to the vault of St. John's where Fanny's coffin was, along with a priest, undertaker, clerk and a parish sexton, to prove this not to be true. When the lid to Fanny's coffin was removed, they of course found her body there. John Moore published a retraction saying that he was wrong. In justice to the person whose reputation has been attacked in the most gross manner by the pretended ghost in Cock Lane, to check the crudity of the weak, to defeat the attempts of the malleus, and to prevent further imposition on account of this absurd phenomenon, I do hereby certify that though from the several attendances on this occasion I have not been able to point out how and in what manner those knockings and scratchings of the supposed ghost were contrived, performed and continued, yet that I am convinced that those knockings and scratchings were the effect of some artful wicked contrivance, and that I was in a more especial manner convinced of it being such on the 1st of this month, when I attended with several persons of rank and character, who assembled at the Reverend Mr. Aldrit's Clerkenwell, in order to examine into this increase imposition upon the public, since which time I have not seen the child nor heard the noises, and think myself in duty bound to add, that the injured person, when present to hear himself accused by the pretended ghost, has not, by his behaviour, given the least ground of suspicion, but has preserved that becoming steadfastness which nothing, I am persuaded, but innocence could inspire. But this did not stop him from being arrested for conspiracy, along with Richard Parsons and his wife, Mary Fraser, and a tradesman called Richard James. So their trial was held on the 10th of January 1762 at the Guildhall in London. It started at around 10 AM and finished at 9:30 that night. So there were plenty of witnesses on each side. On the prosecution side, there was Esther the maid and the doctor who had treated Fanny, and also the apothecary who had treated her as well. And for the defence, there were actually some people who still believed that the ghost was real. So the jury only took 15 minutes to find the 5 defendants guilty, but then on the following Monday, 2 more people were found guilty of defaming William Kent, and they were ordered to pay him £50 each in compensation. So the original 5 were brought back to court on the 22nd of November, but their sentencing was actually delayed because they couldn't reach an agreement on what compensation to give to William. On the 27th of January 1763, they were committed to the King's Bench prison until the 11th of February. At this point, John Moore and Richard James agreed to pay William Kent £588, so they were released. So Richard Parsons was actually sentenced to 2 years in prison for his part in the fraud. He had to stand in the pillory on the 16th of March, the 30th of March and the 8th of April. And instead of the public being mean to him while he was in the pillory, they were actually really kind to them, and some of them did arrange collections for him. Now, there is one more thing. I don't actually know what happened to Fanny's baby. I have had a look, but basically all the write-ups and sources about it do not mention the baby again, so I'm guessing that sadly the child died along with Fanny. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little video. If you did, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.